Hi, everyone, and welcome to Get Hired Live. I'm your host, Andrew Seaman, LinkedIn Senior News Editor for job seekers and careers. I'm so excited you're joining us today on Get Hired Live. We have these conversations every week, and I can't wait to dive into today's topic with our guest. But first, as I always ask of you, I want you to introduce yourselves in the comments. We already have a bunch of you saying hello. I see Antonio, Whitney, Hank, Mary, Salma. We have Edward from Canada, Kendall from Washington State, Letty from New York, where I am right now. So keep introducing yourselves in the comments, but more than just telling us where you're from, make sure you tell us a little bit about your job search or your career ambitions. And then once you do that, network with each other, connect with each other, and make sure that you are building those bridges and relationships to propel yourself forward in your job search and career. For example, maybe you see someone who is in your area, literally in your maybe neighborhood, or maybe you see someone who is working in your industry or the industry you want to work in, and reach out and build those connections. I see some people who share their LinkedIn profiles and say they're open to connecting. So make sure you're doing that throughout the show. And today we're going to be talking about a really relevant topic to all of that. And it's being the CEO of your own career. And we have a really wonderful guest. We have Maya Grossman, who is a career coach and the author of Invaluable. So welcome, Maya.
Thank you. So excited to be here.
Yes, well, it's so exciting to have you here. And before we dive in, I just want to give a quick hello to a few more people out there. Carlos from Houston, Didi from California, Florence from Dallas, Kitia from Washington, D.C., Marianne from Georgia, Joy from Florida. Oh, Kalita from Washington, D.C. My apologies for the mispronunciation. But yeah, Maya, today we're going to be talking about being your own CEO of your career. And, how did you come up with this concept? Because it's a really great sort of thinking tool almost, just to sort of say, when I'm planning my career, how do I steer this ship?
Yeah, thank you for that. So funny enough, I, for the majority of my career, thought what most people think. So for the first 20 years of my career, someone else was calling the shots. Someone else was telling me what to do. Early on, it was my parents, and then, our teachers at school. And even when I went to college, the education system is very clear about what you need to do. If you do X, you get Y. So when I stepped into the workforce, I basically assumed I'm going to have to play by the same rules. And that meant doing, my work, keeping my head down and waiting for someone to give me an opportunity. But about 7 years into my career, something happened that really changed my perspective. So I, for the first time, figured out what I wanted to do, and I had to pivot into marketing. But I couldn't actually rely on the company or my boss to give me the opportunity that I wanted, because that company didn't even have a marketing department. So for the first time, I had to ask myself, okay, how am I going to do this? How am I going to make this massive change in my career? And I had to get creative, and I had to figure it out for myself. And I was able to do that. I actually was able to create an opportunity to move into marketing. And that made me stop for a minute and think, because I didn't have to wait for a company or a manager or the economy to create an opportunity for me. I created it for myself. And when I did that, everything changed. So the first 7 years of my career, I made little progress. And once I figured out I can be in control, once I started thinking like I was the CEO of a one-person company, that's me, everything completely changed. I doubled my salary with every move. I was promoted every 2 years on average, and I got to work for the best companies in the world. And initially, I thought it was just me, but then I started teaching other people how to do that. My friends, my colleagues, my family, and they were all making quantum leaps in their career. So I actually realized, there's a different way to manage your career. And if you take control, you can pretty much make everything happen.
Yeah, I think that is a really great mindset to be in when you're navigating your career. And I just want to take a quick moment also to say hi to some more people who are joining the stream. I want to say hi to Michelle from California, Jonah from Michigan, Debbie from Indiana, Vanessa from Chicago, Andrew from Connecticut, Enrique from Chile, Katrina from Florida, Jeff from Indiana, Elaine from North Carolina, Diane from Connecticut, and Eric from South Carolina. Welcome to all of you. We are talking about being the CEO of your own career at Maya Grossman. So also keep introducing yourselves and get your questions in, because we're going to be taking those in just a little bit. And Maya, my next question would be, when you have this concept of I'm going to be the CEO of my career, can you give us an example of a decision you might make with that mindset while you're navigating your job search, your career? What is sort of a tangible example of that?
Yeah, I think a great example is what people usually think about getting a promotion, right? So I think for the most part, people assume, okay, I need to be at a company for this amount of time. I need to maybe apply or go through a process, and I need to wait for someone else to actually give me permission or allow me to get that opportunity. But my experience has been that you can actually create those opportunities for yourself. So if you think like a CEO, you'll ask yourself this question, okay, if I want to get a promotion, if I want to get to the next level, what would it take? What does it actually look to have a more senior role? And then you reverse engineer what it takes to get there. And you understand what is the gap between where you are today and where you want to go. And you take action, intentional action, to gain those skills and those experiences. So essentially, you're qualifying yourself for the role before you even apply. And when you do that, there's no waiting and there's no hoping. You're actually creating the opportunity for yourself, because you start doing the work. And when it comes to actually getting that promotion, it's more it's just more of a formality, because you'll already be doing the work that you want to do. It's just about getting that official title.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, it's such a great concept to be sort of the person making the decisions and not just going with the flow. And I think a lot of people, they do that. They sort of, I hear from so many people actually, where they say, listen, I should be up for a promotion, but we haven't had this conversation, at my workplace. Or they will tell me that they are just applying to jobs and hoping for the best. So if someone is going through the motions and they're kind of going with the flow at the same time, how do you begin to take control of your career?
Yeah, so first and foremost, unfortunately, hope is not the best career strategy. So you definitely need to have a strategy. But funny enough, becoming the CEO of your career actually starts with belief. It has to start with you realizing and accepting that you actually have the power to make those decisions and create those opportunities. And unfortunately, research shows that most people never rise above their own opinion of themselves. So essentially, if you don't believe you're going to be able to manage your career, you probably won't be. So it really has to start with your mindset and your belief. And then I believe you need 3 things in order to really take control of your career and become that CEO. Number 1, you need to have a strategy. You need to have a clear career destination. You need to know where you're going. It doesn't have to be 10 years into the future. It can just be the next thing that you want to do, so that you can reverse engineer what it takes and take real action. Number 2, you're going to need to have the right mindset, because you can have the best strategy in the world, but if you don't actually take action, if you don't have confidence, if imposter syndrome is stopping you, you'll never actually move from the dream to the reality. And lastly, number 3, you're going to need systems, because procrastination is real. And when you manage your career, you have to think about it like going to the gym. You can't do it once and expect to get results. You're not going to get a six-pack if you went once. You really need to practice and do it over and over again to see the compounding results. And it's kind of hard to overcome procrastination. So when you have systems, when you create habits, it's a lot easier to turn working on your career into something that you do every day. So belief, strategy, mindset, and lastly, having the right systems in place.
That's what I've been doing wrong with the gym. I went once and I've just been expecting to be skinny, and it's not working.
I wish it would work like that, but no, we have to put in the hours.
Of course. And well, yeah. And, again, to all of you watching, welcome. We are talking about being the CEO of your own career at Maya Grossman. And we have so many people in the stream. We have Lisa from Alaska, Kim from Canada, Elaine from Colorado, John from Las Vegas, and Sylvia from California. Welcome to all of you. Get your comments in. We'll be taking those in just a bit. And my next question for you is, being the CEO of your own career can sound like a great practice, but when you're actually doing it, a lot of people, they stand in their own way. You could call it imposter syndrome. You could call it some other things. How do you get over your fear and maybe feelings of inadequacy to make sure that you can actually charge ahead? So I guess that belief portion, how do you really embrace that?
Yeah. So first and foremost, if you're feeling like that, you're not alone. About 70% of people experience imposter syndrome one time or another. If I'm being honest, my first day as the VP of marketing, I felt like a fraud. I thought someone was going to come in and tell me they made a terrible mistake. And I had a decade of experience. But it's very hard to control how we feel. So, what really made a difference for me and what I teach others is to really understand that your thoughts are not facts. Your thoughts are not truth. Just because you're thinking something doesn't mean that it's real. And what happens is whenever we try to do something new, whenever we want to experience something we've never done before, it's a little bit scary. And our brains are wired to stop us from feeling pain. So whenever our brain thinks, oh no, Maya's going to try and do something that might end up with a painful result, our brain try to stop us. And it's stopping us by telling us stories that are just going to make us feel inadequate and are going to stop us from taking action. So once you realize that your thoughts are not facts, you can start questioning them. And something that I really like doing, because it's very easy for me to come here and say, oh, just don't believe what you're thinking, but we still feel it. So it's very hard to detach the two. So here's what I usually recommend that you do. Write down what it is that you're feeling. I'm not good enough. I'm not ready. They're going to find out that I'm a fraud. Write it down. And then start thinking like a journalist or a detective. And your goal should be to either prove or disprove your thoughts. You need to find proof that will demonstrate whether it's true or no, or not truth. So for example, for me, when I thought that I was a fraud, I would ask myself, okay, have you ever seen anyone else being ousted for being a fraud? Has it ever happened to you, to your friends, someone you know? And the answer was no. And then I asked myself, okay, if I'm really a fraud, that means I am lying, I am deceiving all of the wonderful people who decided to hire me, which will make all of them, well, idiots. Is it possible that everyone else except me is that gullible? And the answer, again, is no. So essentially, through going through this process, I can prove to myself that my thoughts are not real. And that gives you an opportunity to tell yourself a better story. Because you know what? I've never done this before. And maybe I am not ready, but I figured so many other things out before. I will probably figure this one out as well.
Yeah. And Liam in the comments says, your thoughts are not facts is the most important lesson I've learned. And I think that's so important. And in fact, I was just talking to a college class a couple weeks ago, and we were talking a little bit about that. And I sort of made the point is when you are feeling uncomfortable and unsure of yourself, that is when you turn inward. And, you have to realize that everyone has those moments, and everyone at some point sort of feels like they're faking it in a way, but really, you just have to wait until you get to that next sort of crest where you get to feel confident again, and you'll sort of propel yourself forward. And something else that I do that I really like to do is if I am taking a risk, I like to think of what happens afterward. So it could pay off and it might not pay off, but what happens after that? And I find that when I know what that next step is, it helps me get over that loss. So if I take the risk and it doesn't play out the way I thought, at least I know what my next step after that'll be. And it sort of gives me the confidence to keep going. But yeah, I think the idea of sort of writing down what is true, what is not true is so important. And, another question that I have is, you mentioned creating your own opportunities in your career. So once you start acting as the CEO of your own career, how do you create opportunities for yourself?
Yeah. So funny enough, I actually have a chapter in my book called Become an Opportunity Digger. And essentially, it just means that thinking about opportunities, creating opportunities is something, once again, that you need to do on an ongoing basis. Because maybe when you set up your career goals, you ask yourself, hey, how can I, get more responsibility? Or how can I become a people manager? And at the time, the opportunity wasn't there. But every single day things change, right? People join companies, people leave companies, the economy goes up and down, industries change. So you have to consistently ask those questions in order for you to find those opportunities. And what I usually recommend for people to do is to literally have a calendar invite once a week, once a month, depending on your availability, to just look at your goals and consistently ask yourself, okay, how can I make this happen? What has changed in the last week or month or year that will actually allow me to gain this experience or learn this skill? And for the most part, you will find those opportunities, because when you start focusing on something, your brain automatically thinks it's important. So it starts sending information your way. So the more you think about what you want, the more likely it is that you will actually come up with ideas to create those opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's a great roadmap for people. And, another question I have about the CEO concept is that, CEOs of actual companies, they think of strategic plans, which is always a good move when you're thinking about your career. But CEOs often look 5, 10, 15 years down the road. Should you do that for your career, or how long should you really think about planning when it comes to your job search, career planning?
To be fair, I don't think there's a one size fits all. I think some people, if they already have the dream, if they know what they want, they can think a lot more into the future. For me, for example, when I just stepped into marketing, very quickly I decided my goal will be to become a CMO. And I was able to plan almost 10 years into the future. But you can just think about your next move. And if not a move, maybe just a skill that you want to learn. I think the focus here is to be more intentional, meaning to have a specific goal that you're trying to achieve and then taking action to actually get there. And that's kind of the difference between thinking more like an employee, which is just, I'm just going to come to work every day, do my thing, and hope that something will happen, versus I'm going to be in control. I'm going to make a decision about the skill, the experience, the role that I want to have, and I'm going to work towards that goal every single day.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And before we get to questions, and we have a bunch coming in, and make sure to all of you listening and watching that you continue to put your questions into the comments. But Maya, my last question for you is, when it comes to taking control of your career, what's one thing people watching today can do to put themselves on that path?
Yeah, I think the first thing, if you've never done this, if you spent most of your time just kind of, floating and hoping that something will happen, I think the first thing you can do is to think about your career destination. Figure out what it is the next thing that you want to do, the type of experience that you want to gain. Maybe it's a different role. Maybe you're thinking about a promotion. Whatever it is, just get really specific about what you're looking for, so you can then try and reverse engineer how to actually get there. And if I can give people one tip, and this is probably the fastest way to grow your career, and for some reason, 95% of people ignore it. Once you have that career destination, find people who are doing the work that you want to do. Find people who have the job that you're dreaming about, and just have a conversation with them. Learn, how did they get that job? What are the skills that they're using the most? What is it really like to have this job? What does the day-to-day look like? Because when you do that, you will gain such valuable insights that will allow you to build that roadmap, the one that will eventually allow you to qualify yourself and get that dream job.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think it's a great time to transition to some questions from our audience. And, the first one comes from Jorge, and this is a really great question. How did you handle office politics to get promoted? And I think this is something that weighs on a lot of people's minds.
Yeah, well, let me start by saying no matter what I teach you here today, at the end of the day, a company is built out of people. And sometimes you can influence them and impact them. And I'm going to give you a few examples on how to do that. But there will be times where you can change people's minds or the culture. And it's unfortunate, but it's just a reality. So when it comes to politics, well, I think for the most part, when you're thinking about a promotion, when you're thinking about qualifying yourself for the next role, you need to be very strategic. So there are two ways you can do that. If you have a good relationship with your manager, then I highly recommend that you bring them for the journey, right? Have a conversation, talk to them about your goals, explain what you're looking for, and they might be able to help you gain those opportunities, but they will also have your back if any questions arise in the process. In addition, while your manager is usually one of the most important people, you will probably have a few other stakeholders who might impact the decision about whether or not you should get a promotion. And you want to make sure that you build relationships with those people. That's not to say that you need to suck up for them or to do extra work for them, but to figure out how to give value, figure out what it is that they need, what it is that they are trying to achieve, and see if there's anything you can do, within your responsibilities that would actually impact them. And the goal is that whenever everyone are in the same room and they need to make a decision about your promotion, they will all go to bat for you because they remember that you added value, they remember that you did a great job, and they're happy to back up your request. Now, in order to actually qualify for that promotion, you're going to have to do the work, meaning you're going to have to figure out what the next level looks like and then slowly take on additional work. And when I say additional work, I don't mean for you to work extra hours. I mean for you to ask for tasks and projects that will actually give you the skills that you're missing. And to do that, you need to get really good at saying no for things that are just groundwork, things that are just more of the same. And while, yes, other people will have an impact on your ability to grow, once you start doing the work, once you add value, and note, companies, the company that you work for, their goal is to make money. So if by taking additional responsibilities, if by qualifying yourself for that next role, you're actually adding value, meaning you're saving money, you're making money, or you're improving processes, it is very likely that it will be an easy decision for them to give you that promotion that you're looking for. And in that way, essentially, you're not relying on office politics, you're actually demonstrating your abilities and getting the reward for it.
Yeah, all great advice. And the next question comes from Elaine, and she asked, how can you boost your chances of earning an interview during your job search? How do you stand out?
Yeah, so there are two things that I like doing. First and foremost, I don't usually rely on applying online. So I would definitely try and find either the hiring manager or some of the people who could potentially end up on my team and try and have informal interviews with them. And that way kind of have an easier way to get my application actually reviewed. And then number two, something that I've done many times in my career, I actually create a portfolio. So I don't just stick to my resume. I actually have a portfolio, even as a marketer, that demonstrates some of the highlights of my career and some of the things that I was able to do. And a portfolio is not a different version of your resume. It's actually an opportunity to demonstrate things that are hard to grasp when someone is reading a resume. And I like to create something more visual and attractive so people actually click through and enjoy going through it. But in the process, they actually gain more information about me. And I think because not a lot of people actually spend the time to create a portfolio, it really helps stick out.
Yeah. And I think also, if you're going into those meetings with people, like you said, having something visual, having something engaging is something really great to give them, because a lot of people, they worry that they need to have bright, bold colors on their resume or something like that. And that is fine. But, if you really want to do something creative and out of the box, it's best to do that when you're going to be meeting those people in person, because you can
Yeah.
make that impact directly. So I think that's a great piece of advice. And we have a question here from John, which is, how do you identify an opportunity that is going to give you room to grow? And how do you sell your idea to show potential value?
Yeah. Well, let me give a specific example. Earlier in my career, I wanted to gain more strategic experience. So my dream was to become a CMO. And I realized in order to do that, it's not enough to have a marketing skills. I really need to understand strategy. But at the time, my role didn't actually qualify me to do that. So I remember going to my manager. He was working on a QBR report, so quarterly business review, and I actually offered to help. I said, I know that you hate creating presentations, so let me do that for you. And all I want in return is just to see the information to learn how you actually go through the process of creating a strategy. And for the first quarter, I just created a really nice presentation. The second quarter, my manager actually sent me all the data and gave me the opportunity to create the first draft of the deck. And then 2 quarters later, I was just doing the strategy myself. So sometimes just by understanding where you have an opportunity to learn and taking on some of that responsibility, you can actually create the opportunity that you need.
That's great. And we have a question here from Lisa. And Lisa, I'm so happy that you asked this question, because it's so important that we get to this topic in almost every show. And Maya, Lisa says, I am in my second career at 51, entry level. How do I convince people to take a chance on me?
I love this question because I sometimes call it took a step back when I was 28. So I did not start my career in marketing. I spent 7 years as a travel agent, something that really didn't have a lot to do with marketing. And I had to figure out how to make that move. And then if you look at my background, I did pretty much everything you can think of in marketing, which meant every time I made a move, I had to convince someone to take a chance on me, because while I had marketing skills, I've never done the actual role they were hiring me to do. And I think when you want to do that, you need to do two different things. You need to gain the knowledge. So it's very important that you immerse yourself and you learn everything you can about this new industry or discipline. And I'm not talking about reading 2 blog posts. I'm talking about spending 50 hours listening to podcasts, reading books, interviewing people who are doing the work, so that you absorb the language, but you also gain the knowledge. But unfortunately, knowledge is not enough. You also need a little bit of experience. And while it's hard to have experience without an actual job, there are ways to do that. One, I don't know if you've already made that transition, but you can actually use your current employer to gain the experience you need for your next job. When I worked for the travel agency, I volunteered to create a Facebook page so I can learn about social media. So that's one example. You can actually volunteer. You can do free work. I don't know why people think free work doesn't count. If you get results, that free work counts, and you can put that on your resume. And lastly, you can just create your own project. There are so many free tools out there today that you can pretty much create anything and everything. And here's a great tip. If you actually create a project for a brand that you like or for a company you want to work for, you can then send your project to them. And it's basically you demonstrating how wonderfully you would do the work that they could hire you to do.
Yeah. In fact, I was just looking through LinkedIn a little bit this morning, and I saw Austin Belchak, who is also a career coach. One of his clients did something similar where, they didn't get a job, but they did a portfolio, or they did a sort of a proposal for a company, sent it to them anyway, and they ended up with the job
Yeah.
because, they were showing value and they took that initiative. And my last question, and I think this goes back to the imposter syndrome part of this, is from David. And David asked, how do you deal with external negative voices or toxic folks?
Okay. The easy answer is you need to ignore them, but it's actually very hard to do. So what I usually try to ask myself is, why are they doing it? And I think for the most part, people are finding it really hard to see you grow because it reminds them that they're stuck behind. They don't like seeing you trying something new because they don't have the courage to do it. So, usually, what I tell people is that you actually need to accept it with kindness and try to bring people along for the journey. So, instead of being jealous or instead of being intimidated by you growing and learning and trying new things, you can actually try and bring them along, teach them, show them what you're doing, and allow them to really embrace the possibility of becoming the CEO of their own career so they can be happy as well. And it's not always easy, but I find that if you are consistent with it, and if you, instead of getting mad or angry, you actually reply with kindness, very often people will come around.
Yeah. And, as someone who spent a big part of their career as a reporter, a lot of people would offer unsolicited feedback. And I think answering with grace and kindness often helped. And sort of if they misunderstood something and we had a nice chat, it ended up actually a very, cordial, nice conversation. So I completely agree with that advice. Thank you so much, Maya. I learned so much from this conversation. I know everyone watching did too.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I can't wait to see how many people start thinking like a CEO of their career.
Definitely. And we've been obviously putting your LinkedIn profile at the bottom of the screen, and our producers have been putting a link to your website and book into the comments. So if you want to learn more about Maya, be sure to check her out there. And also don't forget to follow her on LinkedIn because she's always offering great advice on LinkedIn. But thank you so much, Maya. It was great chatting with you. And thank you to everyone out there who joined us today. Obviously, the world continues to be an up and down place with so many things going on, but please take care of yourself. It is, we have these shows every week. So bring your questions if we didn't get to them this week, because we're always here for you. And next week, obviously, we'll be having another show. And my guest for that on April 22nd will be Alexis Fernandez. She is a financial advisor and hiring director, and that is at 12 p.m. Eastern time. We'll be talking about how to reach your goals and really craft a career that you want. So like I said, that's Friday, April 22nd at noon Eastern time. And my producer will be dropping the link for you to RSVP into the comments. So I hope you will click RSVP and that you'll attend. So please stay well, be careful out there. The pandemic is still a thing. You could only get hired. You could only be a good candidate if you're safe and well enough to do so. So until next time, stay well and best of luck.